The shuttle broke through the purple clouds of Valorous Prime and began its slow descent toward the Crystal Palace. Inside, Ambassador Daniel Carter looked out the window at the alien world below. He was a tall man of 43 years, with tired eyes and gray streaks in his dark hair. He had spent his entire career preparing for moments like this one. Beside him sat his aide, Lieutenant Sophie Walsh. She was younger than him by more than a decade, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. She held a tablet in her hands, reviewing the information they had gathered about the Valorians. "Remember," Sophie said quietly, "Queen Alara is only 26 years old. She became queen 3 years ago after her mother died. Many of the noble houses opposed her. They wanted her cousin to take the throne instead." Daniel nodded slowly. He already knew all of this, but it helped to hear it again. A young queen facing enemies on all sides would be unpredictable. She would need to prove herself strong at every opportunity. Valorians controlled something called the Nexus. Gates. These were ancient structures scattered across the galaxy that allowed ships to travel instantly between distant stars. Without access to these gates, humanity would be trapped in their small corner of space for centuries. Every other species in the galaxy paid the Valorians for the right to use their gates. Now it was humanity's turn to ask for that same privilege. The shuttle touched down in a courtyard made of white stone that seemed to glow from within. Daniel stepped out and felt the alien air fill his lungs. It smelled strange, like flowers and metal mixed together. Valorians lined the pathway leading to the palace. They were tall and thin, with skin that shifted between pale blue and soft purple, depending on how the light hit them. Their eyes were large and seemed to glow with inner light. They wore flowing silver robes that moved like water when they walked. Daniel heard whispers as he passed. His protocol officer, a man named Marcus Hill, walked beside him and translated quietly. "They are calling us the short-lived ones," Marcus murmured. "They also say we smell bad to them." Daniel kept his face calm and friendly. He had dealt with worse insults in his career. He simply kept walking, his small team of diplomats following behind him in neat formation. The inside of the Crystal Palace took his breath away. The walls were made of something that looked like glass, but sang with soft music when the light touched it. The ceilings stretched so high that they disappeared into artificial clouds. Everything about the design made the humans feel small and crude. Daniel suspected this was done on purpose. They walked for what felt like miles through beautiful corridors before reaching the throne room. It was the largest indoor space Daniel had ever seen. Hundreds of Valorian nobles filled the room, their conversations stopping the moment the humans entered. Every glowing eye turned to watch them. At the far end of the room sat Queen Alara on a throne that seemed grown from a single, massive crystal. She was beautiful in a way that did not seem real. Her features looked like they had been carved from moonlight itself. Silver hair flowed down her back like a waterfall. But her eyes were cold. Daniel had seen eyes like that before, and people who saw others as tools rather than living beings. Ambassador Daniel Carter of the United Earth Coalition announced a tall Valorian near the throne. His voice echoed through the vast chamber. Seeking audience with her eternal radiance, Queen Alara of the Thousand Stars. Daniel walked forward with careful steps. He stopped at exactly the right distance from the throne and bowed. The bow was deep enough to show respect, but not so deep that it looked weak. "Your Radiance," he said clearly. "I bring greetings from Earth and all her colonies. Humanity wishes to build a friendship with the great Valorian Empire." Queen Alara looked at him for a long moment without speaking. When she finally spoke, her voice was like the sound of crystal bells ringing. Beautiful, but somehow empty. "So the young species finally crawls from its cradle to beg at our door." Soft laughter rippled through the assembled nobles. Daniel kept his face blank, though he felt Sophie stiffen with anger beside him. "We come not to beg, Your Radiance," Daniel replied calmly, but to offer a partnership that would benefit both our peoples. Humanity has much to offer. The Queen laughed openly this time. The sound was harsh and dismissive. Partnership? Mutual benefit? She leaned forward on her throne. What could creatures who live for mere decades offer to those who have watched stars being born and dying? You are children playing at civilization, Ambassador. You are amusing, perhaps, but you are not important. Daniel felt the weight of every eye in the room pressing down on him. The insult was designed to hurt. It was designed to make him angry or to make him grovel. Every response he could think of had probably been predicted. If he agreed with her, he would look weak. If he got angry, he would prove that humans were primitive. If he tried to be clever with words, they would dismiss him as a trickster. So Daniel did something that none of them expected. He simply turned around and walked away. The silence that fell over the throne room was complete. No one moved. No one breathed. In all of Valorian history, no one had ever turned their back on their monarch and walked away. Guards reached for their weapons. Nobles gasped in shock. But Daniel Carter walked with slow, steady steps toward the exit. His team fell into formation behind him without hesitation. They had trained for difficult situations, and they trusted their ambassador. Ambassador. The Queen's voice cracked through the silent chamber like a whip. You dare to walk away from me? Daniel stopped at the door. He turned his head just enough to speak over his shoulder. His voice was calm and clear, carrying easily through the enormous room. Your Radiance, I was sent here to speak with a great galactic power. Instead, I seem to have found only a young woman who thinks rudeness is the same as strength. When the Valorian Empire is ready for a real conversation between adults, Earth will be waiting. He walked out before she could respond. Behind him, the throne room exploded into chaos. Nobles shouted at each other. Guards demanded orders. And on her crystal throne, Queen Ilara sat frozen, her face showing an emotion she had never felt before. She had been dismissed. She had been judged and found lacking. And the creature who had done this to her was walking away as if she did not matter at all. In that moment, something changed in the young queen. She did not yet know what it was. She only knew that the human ambassador had done something to her that no one had ever dared to do. And she had no idea what to do about it. The diplomatic ship Horizon hung in orbit above Velaris Prime. Inside, Daniel Carter sat alone in his quarters, drinking coffee that had gone cold hours ago. Through the window, he could see the blue and green curve of the alien world below. Somewhere down there, a young queen was probably planning his destruction. Captain Gregory Nash had met him at the airlock when he returned from the planet. The older man's face had been tight with worry. Ambassador, the Valorians have already sent 17 formal protests, Gregory had reported. Their fleet has moved to surround our ship. They are not attacking, but they are very close. What happened down there? Daniel had not answered directly. He had simply asked for a secure communication line to Earth and more coffee. Now, hours later, he finally connected with Admiral Patricia Cole back on Earth. She was 67 years old, with gray hair pulled back tight and a face that gave nothing away. She had commanded humanity's first fleet of starships and had dealt with more alien species than anyone alive. Ambassador Carter, she said through the screen, would you like to explain why half the Galactic Council is demanding we hand you over to them? Admiral, I made a choice to show that Earth expects to be treated as an equal, not as a servant. By insulting their queen? By refusing to accept her insult to us. There's a difference. Admiral Cole leaned back in her chair and studied him for a long moment. Then she asked him to explain everything. Daniel spent the next hour talking about Queen Ilara, about Valorian culture, about what he had seen and felt in that throne room. When he finished, the Admiral was quiet for a while. You are betting, she said slowly. that this young queen cannot afford to look weak. She cannot let it be known that someone walked away from her without facing consequences. But she also cannot start a war over an insult, because that would make her look even weaker. Yes, Admiral. Yes, Admiral. She has to come to us now. Anything else damages her position. And if you are wrong? Daniel allowed himself a small, tired smile. Then my career will be much shorter than I planned. To his surprise, Admiral Cole smiled back. Hold your position, Ambassador. We will see how this plays out. But if this works, you had better have a plan for what comes next. The next 3 days were the longest of Daniel's life. The Valorian fleet stayed close to the horizon, but did not attack. Messages came from the planet demanding apologies and offering threats. Daniel refused every demand and ignored every threat. Sophie Walsh spent most of her time monitoring communications from the planet's surface. She brought Daniel reports about the chaos his actions had caused. The noble houses were fighting among themselves. Some wanted to destroy the human ship as an example to others. Some argued that this would make them look afraid of the humans. Queen Ilara had not appeared in public since the incident. They do not know what to do, Sophie observed on the third night. This has never happened to them before. That is exactly what I was counting on, Daniel replied. They have controlled the gates for 3,000 years. Everyone needs them. Everyone bows to them. They have forgotten what it feels like when someone says no. But what if they decide the only solution is to make an example of us? Daniel looked out at the Valorian fleet surrounding their ship. Each of those vessels could destroy the horizon in seconds. They were completely at the mercy of the Valorians, and everyone knew it. Then we die, he said simply. But we die standing up, not kneeling down. And humanity will remember that. On the fourth day, a small shuttle approached the horizon carrying diplomatic flags. Sophie woke Daniel from an uneasy sleep with the news. A royal envoy is requesting permission to come aboard. Daniel got dressed quickly. Let them aboard, but make them wait in the reception room for exactly 15 minutes before bringing them to me. The envoy was named Lord Thiessen. He was older than most Valorians Daniel had seen, with eyes that held centuries of experience. He looked tired, like a man who had spent too many years playing political games. Ambassador Carter, Lord Thiessen began after they had exchanged formal greetings. I am here to find a way forward from this situation. Then speak, Lord Thiessen. I am listening. Her radiance was perhaps too quick in her judgment of your species. There are some in the court who believe a more useful conversation might be possible. Daniel noticed the careful words. Some in the court? Not the queen herself? Lord Thiessen's expression flickered slightly. The queen is young. She has much to learn about how things work between species. Some of her advisors have suggested that her approach may not have been wise. Daniel leaned forward in his chair. Lord Thiessen, let me speak plainly. I did not come here to receive an apology that has been filtered through messengers. If Queen Ilara wants to reopen our talks, she can invite me herself. And when she does, she will speak to Earth's representatives as equals, not as children to be scolded. That is asking a great deal. It is asking for the minimum that is acceptable. Earth has survived longer than anyone predicted. We have built a civilization that reaches across stars. We did it without gate networks, without the advantages your people take for granted. If that does not earn respect, then there is nothing more for us to discuss. Lord Thiessen looked at him for a long moment. Something shifted in those ancient eyes. It might have been surprise. It might have been respect. I will carry your words to the Queen, Ambassador. But I warn you that the days ahead will be difficult. After the envoy left, Sophie found Daniel on the observation deck, staring at the planet below. You just made things much more serious, she said. Things were already serious. I just made it clear. And if the queen's pride will not let her back down? If she refuses? Daniel turned from the window. His face was lined with exhaustion, but his eyes were sharp and clear. Then we learned something important about the Valorians. And we start making plans based on what we learn. He looked back at the blue-green world spinning slowly below them. Somewhere down there, a 26-year-old queen was making the hardest decision of her young life. The fate of two civilizations hung on what she would choose. Daniel could only wait and hope that he had judged her correctly. That somewhere beneath the cold mask and the cruel words, there was a leader worth believing in. The stars burned on around them, silent and patient, as they always had been and always would be. 2 weeks passed in tense silence. The Valorian fleet remained around the horizon, neither attacking nor leaving. Daniel used the time to learn everything he could about Valorian society. He read their histories, studied their politics, and tried to understand the forces that shaped their civilization. He learned that Queen Ilara faced opposition from 3 powerful noble houses. These houses had wanted her cousin to become ruler instead of her. For 3 years, they had worked against her at every opportunity. He learned that the Valorian economy depended on the fees they charged other species to use their gates. Without those fees, their empire would slowly collapse. He learned that in 3,000 years of history, no one had ever refused to bow to Valorian power. Until now. On the 15th day, a message arrived with the royal seal. Sophie read it out loud. Her eternal radiance, Queen Ilara of the Thousand Stars, invites Ambassador Daniel Carter to a private meeting at the Summer Palace. Transport will be provided. The ambassador may bring one aide. Daniel felt something shift inside his chest. This was what he had been waiting for. A private meeting, Sophie said. No nobles. No court watching. She wants to separate this from what happened in public. That is intelligent of her, or it could be a trap. Perhaps. But I do not think so. She has had 2 weeks to think about what happened. A young ruler facing enemies inside her own court was just walked away from by a species everyone considers weak. She needs to understand how that happened. And you are going to explain it to her? Daniel smiled grimly. I am going to show her. The Summer Palace sat on cliffs above an ocean that seemed to be made of liquid light. Waves of color rolled across its surface in constant motion. The palace itself was smaller than the Crystal Palace, more personal. It was a place for private conversations away from watching eyes. Queen Ilara met them in a garden, filled with flowers that glowed softly in the fading light. She stood rather than sat, wearing simpler clothes than before. Without the grand throne and the hundreds of watching nobles, she seemed younger. Almost vulnerable. But Daniel knew better than to let appearances fool him. Ambassador Carter. Her voice was different now, without the theatrical coldness of their first meeting. You came. Your radiance invited. I responded. She gestured toward chairs arranged near a fountain of crystalline water. Please, we have much to discuss. They sat. Sophie positioned herself slightly behind Daniel, ready to record everything and intervene if necessary. I have spent these past weeks studying your species, Ilara began. I have read your histories. I have watched your broadcasts. I have tried to understand how a civilization so young could produce someone willing to walk away from everything humanity has been seeking. And what did you learn? That you are very strange creatures. She said it without cruelty, almost with wonder in her voice. You live for only decades, yet you make plans for centuries. You have no natural weapons, no special abilities, yet you have conquered every environment you have entered. You are weak as individuals, yet you have built ships that cross between stars. We are what our circumstances made us, your radiance. Nothing more. No. She shook her head slowly. There is something more. My advisors tell me that every other species who came to us for access to the gates accepted whatever terms we offered. They had no choice, they said. The gates are necessary for modern civilization. But you had a choice. You chose pride over practical benefit. Daniel considered his words carefully before speaking. With respect, Your Radiance, I chose neither pride nor practicality. I chose self-respect. There is a difference. Explain this to me. Pride is about believing you are better than others. Self-respect is about refusing to be treated as less than others. I did not walk out of your throne room because humanity is better than Valorians. I walked out because we are not worse. The way you treated us, the attitude you showed, would have built our relationship on a foundation of inequality. That poison would have affected every interaction for generations to come. Ilara was silent for a long moment. Her glowing eyes seemed to look through him rather than at him. My advisors tell me I was foolish, she said finally. They say I let the pressure of court politics affect how I treated potential allies. They say I used your diplomatic mission as a chance to show strength to my internal enemies. Were they correct? To his surprise, she laughed. It was a real laugh this time. Nothing like the cold sound from their first meeting. Of course they were correct. I am 26 years old, Ambassador. By my people's standards, I am barely past childhood. I have ruled for 3 years, and every day of those years has been spent fighting to prove I deserve my throne. When your delegation arrived, I saw a chance to show dominance. I wanted to prove to the noble houses that even species from across the galaxy would bow before me. And instead, a creature with a short life showed you what real strength looks like. She met his eyes directly. Yes, and I hated you for it. For 2 weeks, I hated you with everything I had. Then I started to think, about what? About what kind of ruler I want to be. About whether fear and power are the only paths to leadership. About whether a species that has existed for such a short time might have something to teach us after all. Daniel felt something change in the air between them. This was no longer a careful dance between enemies. It was becoming something different, something more valuable. Your Radiance, may I speak freely? Please do. You have the potential to be a great queen. Not because of your power or your age or your bloodline, but because you are capable of this moment right now. You are capable of sitting across from someone who embarrassed you and asking what you can learn from the experience. That kind of courage is rare in any species. Ilara looked away toward the glowing ocean. My mother was like you, practical, direct. She used to say that the true measure of a ruler was not in how they treated those beneath them, but in how they treated those they could not control. She sounds like a wise woman. She died when I was 16. She was killed, though no one ever proved who did it. The noble houses claimed they had nothing to do with it. Her voice grew hard for a moment, then softened again. She would have handled your arrival very differently. How would she have handled it? She would have met you as an equal from the first moment. She would have recognized what your species has accomplished and seen it as strength rather than threat. She would have built an alliance that made both our people stronger. Daniel leaned forward slightly. It is not too late for that. Ilara turned back to face him. In her eyes, he could see the war between the cold queen she had tried to become and the leader her mother had wanted her to be. No, she said slowly. Perhaps it is not too late at all. The negotiations that followed were unlike anything Daniel had experienced in his long career. Gone were the formal audiences in the throne room. Gone were the sneering nobles and the calculated insults. Instead, Daniel and Queen Ilara met every day in the Summer Palace Gardens, working together to build something new between their peoples. Sophie documented everything carefully. Her early suspicion of the Queen slowly changed into something closer to respect. She is not what I expected, Sophie admitted to Daniel one evening as they reviewed the day's progress. I thought the private meeting was an act. I thought she would go back to being cruel once no one was watching. People are complicated, Daniel replied, especially young people who have been pushed into positions of great power. She has been fighting to survive since she was 16 years old. Everyone around her either wants to use her or destroy her. We might be the first people she has ever met who want neither of those things. What do we want? A fair agreement. Nothing more and nothing less. And it seems that asking for fairness is revolutionary here. The agreement they created addressed both immediate needs and long-term goals. Humanity would gain access to the Nexus Gates at standard prices, not the inflated fees that Valorians charge to newer species. In exchange, Earth would share certain technologies that had developed differently than Valorian science. These included advanced materials and farming techniques that could help with food production problems on several Valorian colony worlds. But the most important part was the cultural exchange program. For the first time in Valorian history, young members of their species would live among humans. Human students would study on Valorous Prime. It was a small step, but one that could change both civilizations over many years. When the framework was complete, the real challenges began. Lord Thason was brought in to review the agreement. He read through it with ancient eyes that had seen thousands of political battles. The noble houses will never accept this, he warned. You are treating humans as equals. Lord Maldois alone will gather half the council against you. Ilara's response surprised everyone in the room. Then Lord Maldois and I will have a conversation. One that should have happened long ago. The confrontation came 2 days later in a closed meeting of the High Council. Daniel was allowed to watch but not speak. This compromise had taken Ilara hours to negotiate, against fierce opposition from those who did not want any human present. Lord Maldois was everything Daniel had expected from Valorian nobility. He was tall and ancient, with a face frozen in permanent disgust. He had opposed Ilara becoming queen. He had worked to destroy her reign at every opportunity. Now he saw this agreement with humanity as the perfect weapon to finally bring her down. You would raise these creatures to our level? His voice dripped with contempt. These short-lived animals who were climbing trees when our ancestors built the first gates. Your mother would be ashamed of you. The chamber fell silent at the mention of the dead queen. It was a cruel attack, designed to shake Ilara's confidence, but it did not work. My mother, Ilara said, her voice completely steady, taught me that the measure of a ruler is how they treat those they cannot control. She taught me that true strength comes from wisdom, not from dominance. And she taught me to recognize when old ways of thinking have become chains instead of foundations. She stood up from her throne. This action sent a wave of shock through the assembled nobles. Queens did not stand before their councils. For 3,000 years, the Valorian Empire has maintained its power through control of the gates. We have watched younger species rise and fall, always confident that we were superior. But ask yourselves this: what have we actually accomplished in those 3,000 years? Have we solved our declining birth rate? Have we cured the crystal plague that killed 2 billion of our people last century? Have we created new technologies or new art that would match what our ancestors produced? She walked among the nobles, her presence demanding attention from every eye in the room. We have stagnated. We have become so convinced of our superiority that we stopped trying to improve. And while we rested on what our ancestors built, this young species has done something remarkable. They have grown. Quickly, constantly, without stopping. In 3 centuries, they have accomplished what took us 10 times longer. She stopped directly in front of Lord Maldois, meeting his ancient eyes without flinching. The humans walked away from our power because they did not need us as much as we assumed. Think about what that means. Think about what happens when other species realize the same thing. Our gates are valuable, yes, but they can be replaced. If we continue to treat our partners as servants, they will eventually find other options. And on that day, Lord Maldois, the Valorian Empire will discover that 3,000 years of arrogance have left us completely alone. The vote that followed was closer than anyone had predicted, but the agreement passed. Lord Maldois and his supporters were defeated. Their opposition was recorded, but overruled. A new chapter had begun. Afterward, Daniel found Ilara in the garden, where they had first spoken as equals. She looked exhausted, but triumphant. "That was impressive," he said. "You have made powerful enemies today. I had powerful enemies before today. Now at least they are out in the open, where I can see them." She turned to face him. "Ambassador Carter, I owe you an apology. A real one, not the formal words that diplomats exchange." "For what?" "For insulting you. For insulting your entire species. I was wrong. Not just politically, but morally. I treated you as less than me because it made me feel stronger. That is not the kind of ruler I want to be." Daniel thought about her words carefully. "Apology accepted, Your Radiance. And for what it is worth, I believe you are going to be a remarkable queen, because I can admit when I am wrong. Because you can learn. That is the rarest quality in any leader, in any species." They stood together in the garden as the glowing flowers cast soft light around them. Behind them, the Crystal Palace hummed with activity as news of the vote spread across the planet. Ahead of them lay years of work, of building trust between two peoples who had started as strangers. But for this one moment, there was only the quiet satisfaction of having done something right. Something that might matter long after both of them were gone. The future was uncertain, as it always was. But for the first time, it held real hope. 3 years after the signing of the Earth-Valorian Accords, Ambassador Daniel Carter returned to Valorous Prime for the anniversary celebration. Much had changed since his first visit to this world. The cultural exchange program had succeeded beyond anyone's dreams. Human students at Valorian academies had brought fresh ideas that sparked new debates about old traditions. Valorian observers on Earth had been amazed by human creativity, by the constant flow of new inventions, and new ways of thinking that their own society had lost long ago. Trade between the two civilizations had grown rapidly. Human farming techniques had helped solve food problems on several Valorian colony worlds. Access to the gate network had allowed humanity to establish colonies in distant star systems, spreading across the galaxy faster than anyone had thought possible. But the changes went deeper than business or territory. The Valorian Empire had begun to look at itself with new eyes. Queen Ilara had ordered studies into why their civilization had stopped growing. The results had started a cultural awakening. Young Valorians began questioning traditions that no one had questioned for thousands of years. New forms of art emerged, mixing human influences with ancient Valorian styles. Scientists from both species worked together, combining different approaches to solve problems that neither could solve alone. Not everyone welcomed these changes. Lord Maldois and his supporters remained loud critics, warning that Valorian identity was being destroyed by human influence. There had been protests in the streets, political battles in the council chambers, even an attempted overthrow of the queen that had barely been stopped in time. But the direction of history seemed to be changing. Daniel was older now. Gray had spread through his hair, and new lines marked his face. He had been offered retirement several times, but always refused. There was still too much work to do. Sophie Walsh had been promoted to ambassador and now led diplomatic missions of her own. She sent messages occasionally, filled with stories of negotiations that made their Valorian adventure seem simple by comparison. The anniversary ceremony was held in the Crystal Palace, in the same throne room where everything had begun 3 years ago. The space looked different now. Where once only Valorians had stood, Representatives from 12 different species now mingled together. Their differences celebrated rather than ranked. Queen Elara, now 29 years old, addressed the gathering from her crystal throne. 3 years ago, I made a serious mistake. I allowed prejudice and pride to blind me to the worth of those who came seeking friendship. I insulted a representative of humanity, and in doing so, merely cost my people an alliance that has enriched us beyond measure. She paused, her glowing eyes finding Daniel in the crowd. Ambassador Daniel Carter did something that day that no one had ever done before. He walked away from me. In doing so, he taught me a lesson that I carry with me always. Respect cannot be demanded. It must be earned. And those who believe they are above others often discover that they have been standing on a very small hill. Applause filled the room, coming from beings of every shape and species. Daniel allowed himself a small smile. Later, at the formal reception, Elara found him standing near a window that looked out at the stars. "I hear you might finally retire after this," she said. "I am thinking about it. There are younger diplomats ready to take my place. Sophie's student, a woman named Claire Dunham, shows great promise. Will you miss this life?" Daniel considered the question seriously. "Parts of it. The moments when understanding breaks through. The feeling of building something that will last. But I am 66 years old now, Your Radiance. By human standards, that is getting old. Time to see what else life might offer." Elara smiled. "When we first met, you told me that humanity measures lives in decades, but makes plans for centuries. I did not understand what you meant. I think I do now. Tell me what you understand." "You knew you would never see most of what you were building. The full flowering of what our two peoples could create together will take longer than any human life. But you built it anyway. You laid foundations for generations you will never meet. That takes a kind of faith that my people, with our long lives, have forgotten how to practice. Or perhaps it just takes accepting that some things are more important than ourselves." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the celebration continue around them. Representatives from species that had been rivals for centuries now talked as friends. Young Valorians and humans laughed together at shared jokes. The universe was changing, slowly but surely, and they had both played their parts in making it happen. "Ambassador Carter," Elara said finally, "I want to thank you. Not for the agreement or the alliance, though those matter greatly. I want to thank you for walking away that day, for showing me who I did not want to become." Daniel nodded slowly. "And thank you, Your Radiance, for having the courage to become who you did." He did not stay for the end of the celebration. He had never been comfortable at parties, and there were younger people better suited to the dancing and the toasts that would continue through the night. Instead, he returned to his ship, to his quarters with their window looking out at the stars. Tomorrow, he would begin the journey home. There were grandchildren he had never held, a garden he had always meant to plant, books he had never found time to read. A human life, small by Valorian standards but full of meaning in its own way. On his desk sat a small crystal, a gift from Queen Elara after their first successful negotiation. When light touched it, the crystal sang a single pure note. A reminder, she had told him, that sometimes the most beautiful things come from meetings that start badly. Daniel held the crystal up to the starlight and listened to its song. Humanity's story was still being written, spreading across the galaxy one world at a time. The 26-year-old queen who had insulted them was now one of their greatest friends. The empire that had dismissed them as children was learning to see them as partners. And it had all started because one man had the courage to turn around and walk away. Some victories do not look like victories at first. Their true shape only becomes clear after years have passed and the future begins to take form. On that day in the throne room, Daniel had not known what would happen. He had simply known what he would not accept. Perhaps that was enough. Perhaps that was everything. The stars burned on outside his window, endless and eternal, as humanity continued its long journey toward a future that no one could yet imagine.